Hello everyone, this is part 19 of What If Naruto Had a Secret, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Aburame were calm, collected, near-perfect drones. They never snapped, nor became noticeably irritable. They were silent and, when they did speak, their voices were always reserved. This was as much a necessity as it was because Aburame genuinely enjoyed the piece. It was an established fact, the Aburame never lost their cool. That was, of course, until Aburame Shino had been forced to spend a month with one Hatake Kakashi and Yamanaka Ino. Between the two of them and their idiosyncrasies, they had finally managed to cause Shino to snap. This was a feat to be applauded, since he had managed to survive numerous encounters with what was, on the face of it, an even more trying combination: Uzumaki Naruto and Yamanaka Ino. The only reason he hadn't snapped then, was because the pair had kept each other busy. So it happened that, walking down the street with Ino talking happily beside him, Shino could feel his eye tick with each word. He could only thank the kami for sunglasses. To make matters worse, for of course they could, and usually did, get worse, Shino had the extra joy of dealing with a currently AWOL Naruto. He found it oddly satisfying to picture his bugs swarming up and engulfing the boy until nothing was left but bone. So, where do you think he is? Ino asked, looking around as her now significantly shorter ponytail swatted her shoulders. I mean, Kakashi-sensei didn't tell us much, except that he was doing some special training, but if he doesn't hurry, then he'll be late. I am sure, Shino said, his tone rich with suffering, that Naruto will be here on time. Relax. But, Ino, I do not think that he will be so crass as to miss his own exam, Shino explained tiredly, almost whimpering. This is, after all, a step toward Hokage. True, Ino admitted, falling silent for a moment before looking around again. Where the hell is he? If we're late because of him, or ramen, I'll. Oi! Ino-chan! Shino! Naruto suddenly shouted, racing toward them and waving. Aha! Naruto-kun! Ino called back brightly. Shino was unable to do anything else but palm his forehead. All too soon, the blonde boy was there with them, talking a mile a minute, with Ino taking a moment to comment on how he liked her hair, to which she blushed as they started down the road for the stadium. Shino only listened with half an ear, otherwise, he'd end up trying to K the boy, with his nerves in the state they were in. So, after Kakashi-sensei introduced himself and explained Anko's mission and everything, we got to some serious training, Ino said. We sparred his cage bunsenons every day, and they kept, so totally blocking and escaping anything I tried. The hardest part was when he wanted us to spar while water walking. That, really ate up my chakra, too. Wow, Naruto said, sounding impressed. All Ero Sennin did was have me create a bunch of cage bunsen and just practice things over and over. Huh, what good would that do? Well, the way he explained it was that, when each cage bunsen was gone, I'd gain all their experience and stuff. Which would make me learn things faster, Naruto said, scratching his cheek. According to him, I got, 2 years worth of training in 1 month. No way, Ino shouted. Shino whimpered, then resolved to put a stop to their conversation for the moment. We should hurry, we are going to be late. Oi! Let's go, then. Naruto shouted and took off at a run, with Ino following. Shino sighed and shook his head, speaking to one of his equally annoyed Kikaichu family. I agree, Kekio-chan, they should K and be done with it. He listened for a moment and then sighed in exasperation, knowing that his bugs were forever tainted by his exposure to Ino. Still, he had better answer Kekio or suffer her continued pestering. Yes, Kekio-chan, I think you make a very pretty buzzing noise. Dressed in his formal red and white robes, wearing the proud hat of his station, Sarutobi Sasuke, the Sandaime Hokage, stared out at the vast arena before him. To the left from where he was sitting, in stadium seating, were numerous villages, while behind him on a slightly raised row were the various daimyos. It was a warm day, fine weather, and the sun was bright. And the Sandaime was feeling every second of his 69 years of life. He refused to show weakness. He was the pillar for this village, and, until he could pass his law on, he had to stay strong. He reassured himself, however, that it would not be long. Soon enough, he could pass his mantle on. At first, when Jiraiya had appeared, the Sandaime had made the offer to him. But the man had wisely pointed out that he was no longer suited for the job, and that Tsunade would do far better. Sandaime had agreed sadly, since it meant he would have to bear the weight for a while longer, and then called for Anko and, after much debate, had managed to convince his old student to at least prepare Naruto for the final exam. Still, the Sandaime wondered what, exactly, Anko wanted to ask Jiraiya in private. And what he had charged her for his answer. Knowing his student, it had been something perverted. Sighing, he lowered his grey eyes to the arena before him, sweeping the 9-leaf genin, information that only he had access to springing to mind as he wondered what they would all become in time. There was Hyuga Neji, proud as ever, unbroken by his lot in life, and proclaimed as the most gifted Hyuga ever. There was Rock Lee, the boy nobody had taken seriously, now desperate to prove himself in taijutsu. Tenten, the girl who had survived an abusive mother and a drunken father, who was now trying desperately to become the next Tsunade. Uchiha Sasuke, unbearably as arrogant as all Uchiha were, a genius, and determined to be second to none. Inuzuka Kiba, stubborn to a fault and the best trainer his clan had ever had. Haruno Sakura, totally devoted to Sasuke and a genjutsu specialist soon to eclipse her own sensei. Letting out a sigh, he turned his attention to the final 3 Konoha genin, Uzumaki Naruto, defiant as ever, and sworn, the Sandaime was sure, to the gods themselves to become Hokage someday. Aburame Shino, relaxed as all Aburame, with a deeper connection to his bugs and team than any other Aburame in the last 100 years. Yamanaka Ino, nervous but proud, a kenjutsu specialist whom Hayate had once confided would, someday, become legendary in her own right. They were all the best that this generation had to offer, and he wondered how many would grow today. He was shaken out of his thoughts by the Anbu politely touching his shoulder and indicating an approaching figure dressed in white and blue. Oh, well, Sandaime said, greeting the other man with a smile. Kazekage Dono, you made it. Thankfully, there were no sandstorms, the other man said as he sat down on the chair next to the Sandaime. Yes, still, I imagine you must be tired from such a long trip. Not at all, actually. May I once more say that I am pleased that the exams are being held within Konoha this year, the Kazekage said politely. This way, there can be no mistakes or dishonesty. Konoha ninja are far too high-minded for such deceit. I hate to think that any of the other villages would allow such things to occur, the Sandaime said, knowing, as did the Kazekage, that no village was totally unbiased before turning back to the arena, aware of the anticipation in the air. Seeing the eyes on him, he grinned to himself, offering a polite nod to the Kazekage as he started to get up. On with the show, nay. Hands behind his back, the old man smiled benevolently at the examinees, then flicked his eyes over at the section where the Jonin sensei sat watching. Then he settled his gaze on the crowd at large who had stopped talking to listen to what he had to say. Thanks to everyone for coming to the Chunin selection exam, held this year within the walls of Konoha. We will now begin the matches between the 12 participants who have made it this far. Please stay and watch until the end. Then, amid enthusiastic applause, the Sandaime resumed his seat and watched. Yamanaka Ino was many things, confident of her sword skill, confident of her looks, proud of her family, slightly nervous to be in front of so many people, and she would admit harboring a slight crush on the boy beside her. Still, as she listened to the referee of this exam explain the rules, all of those things except the nervousness disappeared. They could K each other. Ino felt her shoulders tremble slightly as she remembered K and the fear that she could S now coursing through her. Her only means of survival was surrendering something she couldn't bring herself to do, being knocked out or the referee declaring the match over. Glancing nervously at the 3 Sandnins, particularly the redhead with the pale green eyes, she doubted that he would care what the referee said or what she did. He seemed to radiate an air that shouted death, and a dark glee. She prayed to all of her clan's ancestors that she wouldn't have to fight him. Anybody but that boy. All right, that's all the rules. These are the matches, the referee said, holding out a piece of paper for them even as a large screen on a far wall flickered to life so that the crowd could see the same thing. Ino scanned it quickly, eyes darting to the familiar names, and then froze as she spotted her name in the first match of the opening round. Yamanaka Ino, Uchiha Sasuke. Ino felt her stomach drop, unable to believe the cruel twist of fate that would force her into fighting Sasuke. She desperately thought of a reason why that would be impossible, how she could have misread. That had to be it. She had just read the wrong line, and she was really facing someone else. Everybody see who they're fighting? The referee asked without interest as he put the sheet into a pocket. Right, so, the first match. Yamanaka Ino and Uchiha Sasuke. Everyone else go to the waiting room. Ino blanched, her eyes darting around wildly as she saw the others leaving. She so did not want to be there just then. Why couldn't she have been fighting Sakura or something? Turning her attention back to Sasuke, she saw the pink-haired girl give Uchiha a quick peck on the cheek and then start off among the last of the genin. Ino felt a spike in her temper, but was distracted by Naruto. Kick his Naruto said brightly, with a flash of a smile, and then hurried off after the others. Ino stared after him, then gulped, slowly turning back to the Uchiha across from her. Uchiha, who were the most feared fighters in the village, Uchiha who were almost bred for nothing but combat. Now, the first fight, begin. The referee said, his hand through the air. Ino took a steadying breath, mentally reassuring herself that even if he was an Uchiha, and Sasuke, no less she could not let him intimidate her. She was a ninja, after all. Never taking her eyes off the disinterested-looking Sasuke, Ino reached for the sword slung across the small of her back. Assuming a reverse grip with her right hand, she hesitated for a moment, then took 3 silent breaths. On the second breath, she eased the sword ever so slightly out of the scabbard and then, on third breath, she moved, a quick step forward with the left foot, and she exploded forward with her right while drawing the sword with an audible ring of metal on metal as she essed his tea. Sasuke took a half step back, allowing the sword to whistle harmlessly through the air, before he fired off a kunai. Ino, displaying unexpected speed and ability, completed the S and then, shifting the blade so that it pointed down, swept it back across her as she slid her right foot around. With the kunai deflected, Ino channeled her chakra into her legs and darted forward, a downward S aimed at the genius once more. Sasuke dodged once more, and Ino allowed the momentum to carry the blow through. With a quick flick of her wrist, she twirled the sword in the air and caught it in her left hand, coming up to deflect several shuriken. Sliding her left foot back, she shifted her weight and lifted her sword till it was near her cheek, with the edge up and aimed slightly to the side. Narrowing her eyes, she stared along the edge and fixated on Sasuke's face before lowering them to his solar plexus to watch his whole body. Konoha Ryu, Sasuke said in mild interest. That takes some talent to use, which makes me wonder why a Yamanaka is using it. What? Ino asked, taken aback by his comment. It could be taken one of 2 ways, and she knew he had meant it as an insult. Angry at the implication that her family had no talent, Ino made a sharp thrust forward, which was easily dodged, followed by yet another S, which was easily dodged as well. Sasuke, with an annoying casualness, haphazardly threw several shuriken, which she had to backpedal to block. Coming to a stop, back straight and right foot back, she brought her ninja down near her waist, the tip of her blade angled up toward the charging Sasuke's eyes. Timing it as closely as she could, she made a thrust, coming within inches of skewering him. Sasuke, however, twisted aside, his charge temporarily forgotten. Ino released her left hand and twirled the ninja until it came into a right-hand grip. A pretty dance, Sasuke remarked casually. But, then, for someone that cares more for their appearance than skill, I'm not surprised. Ino narrowed her eyes. Just a pretty dance, was it? Someone that cared more about their appearance than skill, eh? She would show him. She only knew 2 dancers, but, by all that was holy, she was going to use them to wipe that smirk off his pretty boy face. With one fluid motion, she lifted her sword and twirled it around while channeling the chakra needed along the blade, then dropped to a knee, driving the tip of the blade into the ground. Dance of the Crashing Dragon. The earth rumbled and then, with a loud crack, exploded upwards in a hail of rock. Ignoring the sounds of surprise at this attack, Ino darted her eyes right and left, aware that Sasuke would dodge it. But, he would be in the air, and her second dance would be perfect for that situation. Switching hands, Ino slid her ninjutsu from the ground and around behind her, narrowing her eyes as she spotted the dark figure of Sasuke. Gathering her chakra, she s-outed him, jumping so that her whole body was behind the strike. Dance of the Midnight Tornado. There was a moment of nothing, then the chakra in the sword was sent flashing into the air, stirring into a small tornado, which crashed into Sasuke unabated. She felt a moment of triumph. She could hear Naruto cheering for her before Sasuke disappeared like a normal bunchen, and she froze. Oh no. Spinning around, she brought her sword up, her left hand over her heart, with the blade extended along her right arm. It was amazing, it was infuriating, it was impossible, but there stood Sasuke, unruffled and only a few steps away from her. Ino couldn't help but gulp as she saw his eyes. They were no longer black, but now the infamous red of the Sharingan. I've never seen that style before. It's called Tsuki-Adori, Ino said, struggling to keep the nervousness out of her voice. Ah, Sasuke said blandly. Another pathetic style, or maybe it's just due to the user. In a burst of anger, Ino charged, her sword whistling through the air. In the heartbeat it took for her sword to complete the arc of her swing, Sasuke calmly reached out and caught the blade between his fingers. Ino felt her arm and shoulder jar from the sudden stop, and then shock and fear raced through her as she realized what he had done. And you call yourself a ninja, now, do you? Sasuke said. What's the matter, Yamanaka? Being pathetic at your clan's own mediocre skills wasn't enough. Now you have to be subpar with a sword, as well. I am not pathetic, Ino shouted, attempting to free her sword. Didn't your parents teach you, Yamanaka? Sasuke sneered, shoving the sword backward, the pommel into her mouth, not to speak when your betters are talking. Stumbling away, Ino cupped her mouth. Shaking her head to clear it of the pain, but not the coppery taste of her own bee, she quickly grasped her ninjutsu and assumed a defensive stance. Sasuke, however, stared at her with utter disdain. Forfeit and save your clan this pathetic display. Ino paused, unsure. It was obvious he was far superior to her, or at least that was how it appeared. But, the way he was talking, the way he glared at her, was making her angry. She wanted to keep fighting, to keep trying, but she wasn't sure if she should. Oi, Ino-chan, don't give up, Naruto shouted, his voice sounding odd in the silence. Ino hesitated for another minute, then nodded to herself, eyes narrowing as she gripped her ninjutsu properly once more. I'm not going to give up, even against you, Ino managed, allowing her anger to well up and consume her. I'll never give up. Fine, Sasuke said blandly, locking his eyes with hers once more. Ino felt as if his gaze was right through her, as if he was trying to will her into submitting, and part of her wanted to. His gaze, those eyes, they were nearly overwhelming, but Ino would not back down. Ino charged once more, pushing off as Hayate had taught her so long ago, while increasing the speed and power of her blade. Sasuke, however, was one step ahead of her, never once showing the slightest concern no matter how hard she tried. Attack after attack, feint and her experience with Kakashi coming into play. She threw everything she had at him, and he treated it all with such disdain that it was truly beginning to shatter her confidence. Sasuke dodged, ducked, and sneered at her every effort. After a flurry of strokes, Sasuke hurled his kunai, wrapped with an exploding note, as he hopped back a couple of yards. Ino managed to jump as the exploding weapon went off harmlessly under her. At the apex of her jump, she came dropping down on Sasuke like an eagle diving on its prey, sword held at her side for a powerful thrust. Sasuke gracefully spun out of the way, and Ino's sword sank to the hilt into the ground, leaving her momentarily defenseless. Yet the genius seemed utterly uninterested in taking advantage of this, instead pulling another kunai and tapping it against his thigh slightly. The instant she managed to yank her ninjutsu from the ground, Sasuke charged, and the air was filled with the rhythmic sound of clashing blades. Spinning around in perfect synchronization, they danced for a moment, then Ino spun a half step faster, trying to him in half. Sasuke, however, twisted and caught her wrist, pulling her entire arm straight, and Ino registered what he was about to do a half-second before he did. It was too late, and the air was rent by her scream of pain along with the sound of her elbow breaking. Collapsing, crying, and now disarmed, Ino's mind tried to retreat from the pain. Is that it? Sasuke asked, his tone dripping with contempt. Perhaps by other standards you are gifted, but to an Uchiha, you, like the rest of the village, are not even average. Ino wasn't sure why she did it, anger, or pride, or maybe it was hearing Naruto shouting her name and trying to get her to fight back, but all she knew was that she made a desperate bid. In one fluid motion, she grasped her discarded sword with her good arm and swept it around in an attempt at hacking Sasuke's ankles off. Sasuke hopped more than jumped, and, when he came down, he landed on her blade at such an angle that it snapped in half. Ino felt her body jerk back from the sudden change and then, eyes wide, caught a front kick to her face. In a spray of Ino was sent tumbling backwards, broken sword falling to the wayside. Coming to a rest, she couldn't decide which felt worse, her head or her arm. Through the darkening haze, she looked up at the boy she had thought so handsome and great, Uchiha Sasuke. And he looked back at her with utter contempt. Pathetic. Thankfully, Ino slid into unconsciousness. Hyuga Neji had been raised to know and understand the Uchiha, the out-of-control offshoot of the Hyuga clan. He, like all Hyuga, understood that the Uchiha was solely devoted to combat and no philosophy. All that mattered was strength and testing their abilities, completely to the detriment of the soul. Still, they were a clan of geniuses, very good at what they did. They were needed, and, to be perfectly honest, they were quite possibly the only clan that could rival the Hyuga. Still, within the short amount of time that the match between the Yamanaka and Uchiha had lasted, Neji, along with everyone else, had been taught a very important fact: they were consumed with an offensive, almost obscene, vanity. Watching the Uchiha smugly walk from the battlefield, Neji smirked to himself, aware of the damage that had just occurred. He could hear the angry muttering, almost a buzzing, from the Compier's balcony. Shaking his head, Neji glanced at Tenten, who was scowling at the enthused pink-haired girl. Restraining his urge to remind her, pointlessly, that being angry at the girl accomplished nothing, he instead focused on the Yamanaka's teammates. The orange-clad boy was being restrained by the Aburame, while radiating enough K intent to denote an impending S. Glancing away from the M-boy, he studied the others, noting the dark looks, then turned to the entrance as the Uchiha reappeared. Sasuke-kun, the pink-haired girl shouted while hurrying to him. Neji, however, was more interested in the blonde boy who had freed himself and was stalking toward the oblivious dark-haired boy. He considered for a minute stopping this Naruto. He could do it, but whatever happened was not his concern. After all, the Uchiha had brought this destiny upon himself, and Neji knew better than most that you could not change such things. Naruto, no. The Inuzuka said warningly, see the altercation off by placing himself between the two. You mother F. Naruto shouted at Sasuke, ignoring the boy clutching at his jacket while struggling to get free. Don't you call Sasuke-kun that. The Haruno said defensively. It's not his fault if Ino Pig didn't known better than to. Sakura, Naruto said, pausing as if seeing her for the first time. Shut up. Neji arched an eyebrow, sharing a look with Tenten. This was an interesting situation. The idiot they had taken the blonde for was obviously an act. Neji could see that, and Tenten looked as if she was thinking much the same thing. Sasuke said, shrugging slightly. I don't care what you think, but just because you're an Uchiha doesn't make you better than anyone else. I promise, for everything you said, for humiliating and hurting Ino-chan, I am going to kick your Whatever, loser, Sasuke said. Neji shook his head, unable to believe how oblivious the Uchiha was. This Naruto was and Sasuke was treating him like he was nothing to worry about. Hyuga Neji, get down here or you're disqualified. Neji-kun, Tenten said, her voice strained with tension. I think you're supposed to be fighting now. Hey, Neji said with a final look at both boys before approaching the railing and taking the direct route to the battlefield. He barely glanced at the referee and, instead, focused on his opponent, the red-haired child with the sand gourd. About time, the referee said, his hand through the air. Second fight, begin. Neji remained unmoved, as did his opponent, the seconds stretching out into minutes. Opaque eyes stared unflinchingly into cold green ones, as if both were fighting a battle without moving. Which, Neji supposed, in a way, they were, since neither was the type to charge headfirst into battle against unknown opponents. Still, this was getting him nowhere. Someone was going to have to make the first move, and Neji supposed it would have to be him. His main goal, then, would be to discover if this other boy had an ultimate defense, as Neji theorized. Activating his Byakugan, he slid his right foot back while lifting his left arm up and keeping his right near his waist. A heartbeat later, he was charging across the battlefield, his eyes noting the sand that was shifting across the ground. Still, the boy didn't move an inch, showed no emotion at all, and Neji frowned even as he came within range to attack with a well-timed Juken strike. The blow was absorbed by a wall of sand, which scattered from the chakra-infused blow, only to reform as Neji struck out yet again. The sand seemed utterly impenetrable, no matter how much speed or how much chakra Neji attempted to strike with. Dodging to the left to avoid the sand as it formed a spear, then leaping back, he spun low and away. Deflecting another attack with a burst of chakra, he came to a stop, realizing now what his eyes had been telling him. The sand was moving independently of the redhead's will, as if it were alive. Interesting. Changing yet again, Neji ducked and weaved his way through the lashing sand. Flashes of chakra filled the air as his hands turned away attack after attack, but something was quickly becoming obvious. No matter what he tried, nor how close he got, Neji could not ell that shield of sand. Or, at least, not without at least one other ninja. Lee could probably ell the shield with his speed, but he would be crushed by the sand. Indeed, it was only because of his bloodline ability that Neji was able to continuously avoid and dodge the attacks. Of course, Neji was a genius, and he could see at least one option against what this boy was capable of. Strike, duck, dodge, twirl. Strike, dodge, duck, twirl. Strike, twirl, duck, dodge. Avoiding yet another attack, Neji grasped his shuriken and kunai, firing them off in a rapid pattern. The wall of sand absorbed the weapons effortlessly, which was what Neji wanted. Lifting his fingers, he smirked, causing the half-dozen hidden explosive notes to go off. The spray of sand was amazing. Neji was satisfied to see the mild surprise on the other boy's face, but he was already charging through the opening he had created. He saw the sand already regrouping, folding in after him, closing off his retreat. Neji, however, focused entirely on attempting to hit the boy, his right hand whistling through the air as he skidded to a halt. He felt his palm connect with the boy's chin, saw the surprise on his face, and then realized that his blow had had no effect other than knocking the boy off his feet. He didn't have much time. The sand was about to engulf him, and Neji spun, emitting as much chakra as he possibly could. Scowling in concentration as he spun, he watched as the sand crashed against his Hakusho Kaiten ceaselessly. The longer this went on, the more Neji began to doubt his ability to keep this up, but he dug deep and didn't stop until the sand finally came to a stop and fell listlessly to the ground. Coming to a stop, Neji turned to stare at the boy, who was standing upright and seemingly unharmed. He could not attempt that tactic again, as he had used up all of his explosive notes. Considering his options, he felt his eyes widen in surprise as he felt the coarse feeling of sand encasing his ankles. Looking down, he almost swore. The sand was rapidly climbing his legs, effectively keeping him in place. Looking up at the boy, he saw the glint of madness in those eyes and realized his fate had never been to win this match. Neji thought briefly about using the sand to attack this Gaara, but discarded that quickly. Suddenly, his sixth sense, the one that warned of immediate danger, flared. Neji quickly expelled as much chakra from his body as he could to free himself, and backpedaled, avoiding other attempts by the sand to grasp him. Reaching a clear space of ground, he raised his hand. "I forfeit." The referee blinked in surprise, then shouted for Gaara to stop, even as Neji dodged another series of attacks. A moment later, the sand hesitated. Neji wondered if the sand really was alive, then retreated back into the gourd. The winner, Gaara of the desert. Neji, as the crowd applauded politely, considered Gaara silently, then turned his mind to the odds for an upcoming situation. Perhaps it was time to place a bet. Hyuga, for all of the greatness, held a guilty pleasure in betting. Besides, if that Uchiha was so willing to create the fate he now faced, why shouldn't Neji take advantage of it? Yamanaka Inoiki was a great many things: a highly skilled ninja, alarmingly good at flower arranging, a decent man, and a good husband. Most important, though, was that he was a father, a very overprotective father, with a very short temper when it came to his daughter's well-being. So, needless to say, as he was pacing in the hallway outside of the treatment room, Inoiki was rather upset. Actually, the correct term would be livid. It had been all his wife could do to keep him from jumping into that arena and that prick of an Uchiha's tea. It was still a very tempting thought, actually. Sasuke might have been able to shoot his mouth off about Ino, but Inoki had several years' experience on the boy. The only reason he hadn't was because his wife had convinced him that Ino would not appreciate her father being arrested for M. So as his wife talked with the medical staff and his daughter recovered, Inoki listened to the distant noise of the match between the Inuzuka and the puppeteer while trying to figure out how best to channel his impotent rage. He briefly considered the fact that, since he lived in a village full of ninja, he could always pay someone to the boy. It would be easy enough. It wouldn't even have to be an official mission, either. He knew the right people to get it done without too much fuss. He wouldn't, though. That would be wrong. No matter how badly Inoki wanted to see the boy suffer, he couldn't pay or ask a fellow Konoha ninja to do that to one of their own. It was just too bad that there wasn't someone in this exam that would willingly do it on their own. And then, he heard a distant voice whisper that there was someone. Uzumaki Naruto. He was Ino's teammate and friend, had stormed in to check on her, and undoubtedly the boy was now planning Sasuke's M. Hopefully a painful and B. Inoki grinned. They would meet, if not in the second round, then in the final match. Inoki thought as he ran his fingers through his hair. From what Ino had told him after her training with Kakashi, Naruto was very strong. Which was no surprise, really, considering what little was known about the other blonde, including the rumors of what had happened in the Forest of Death. If he was strong enough to fight and hold off an S-ranked criminal, then Naruto should be able to tear Sasuke limb from limb. Suddenly, Inoki grinned. Oh, how stupid of him not to see this chance sooner. Before long, he was hurrying out to the arena and into the streets, heading for the nearest bar that was taking bets. This was as close to a sure thing as he had ever had. Sasuke against Naruto was going to be his payday. It was funny, the Jonin mused to himself, not even a full month ago, Inoki had been upset and worried about his daughter being on the same team as that Naruto. Considering the boy's past and the mysteries surrounding his survival, it was understandable. Now, though he was placing his daughter's pride as a shinobi in the boy's hands. If he had stopped long enough to really think about what he was doing, Inoki would have realized how strange and foolish this idea was, but was not about to stop and think. Reaching the bar, he slipped inside without being noticed, mildly surprised to feel the tension that filled the building. Looking around, he could see off-duty military police officers, who were avoiding the rest of the bar, and then everybody else. Inoki put that to the back of his mind and walked to the bar and ordered his sake before turning to the nervous-looking man who was toying with his pen. Are you still taking bets, Bakuto-san? Inoki-san. The man said in surprise before nodding uneasily. Grabbing the cup and bottle set before him, Inoki poured himself a drink and then gulped it down. I take it the odds are heavily in that Uchiha's favor for promotion. Yes, Bakuto said, shifting as attention turned to them. Good, Inoki said, pouring another drink before quaffing it easily. I'm putting everything on Uzumaki Naruto, for promotion over Uchiha Sasuke. Amid the gasps of surprise, the renewed betting and noise, Inoki poured himself another drink and then stared up at the closed-circuit TV of the arena. The match between the Inuzuka and Kankuro was coming to a close, apparently in a double KO, but he didn't care. Instead, he gulped down his sake and set his jaw, impatience and anger boiling up inside him. If that Naruto could actually win, Inoki would never say another bad word about him. Security was tighter than it had been in a long time. Seidan mused silently as he made his lone patrol of the key Anbu points through the surrounding area of the exam arena. There was a little over 150 Anbu within the village. The bulk of the Anbu had been deployed for maneuvers near the borders or field assignments. By normal standards, it would be enough to handle any situation, but Seidan knew this would not hold true today. Coming to a stop in the branches of a tree, he frowned behind his mask, studying the Anbu he could see dotting the rooftops. They were unmoving, like statues, but aware and ready for an attack from unknown enemies. That would be their mistake. None of them were aware that at this moment key military police and Jonin were planting bombs. That their friends, comrades and lovers were moving into position to deliver in one fell swoop what had not existed since the rise of the shinobi nations. Unity. Seidan felt sick to his stomach, knowing what was coming, feeling it in the air. He could see select captains, members of Unity, motion to those loyal to them into unapproved positions. Those Anbu who noticed were quickly K in silence, the warning garroted just as it had begun. He was the only one who knew, the only one who could raise the alarm. Yet he couldn't, because, in all honesty, he was not sure where his loyalty lay. Was it to the Sandaime, or to the office itself? To the ideal of what the lament or the dream of what Unity was trying to create? If he said nothing, if he allowed this to occur, his hands would be irrevocably drenched in innocent B. But his loved ones would have a chance to serve a nation that had one voice, one vision. A nation that would have no need for Anbu or politics. But at what cost? Seiden-san, status. Kakashi's voice crackled softly in his earpiece. 10 to 23, Commander, Seiden said softly, his mind and soul still in turmoil. Which side would he choose? He was pulled from his inner turmoil by the feeling of someone joining him on the branch. Turning, Seiden found himself staring at the bird mask of Chugi, his friend who had placed him into this dilemma. Chugi, whose sister he was dating, the man who believed in honesty and honor above all else. The man that had asked him to betray the wishes of the Hokage for a dream. Chugi-san. Seiden-san, the man returned politely. So, have you decided? It was an innocent question, at least that was how it appeared. In reality, his friend had asked the most important question of any man's life. Where does your loyalty lie? Are you willing to betray this village for the supposed good of all? Will you destroy everything you have for this dream? Commander, Seiden said, voice wavering, and then his sentence unfinished. He would never know just how easily Chugi lied to cover his or that Kakashi had heard the warning in his tone. All he knew in the heartbeat it took for his life to end, was that he knew where his loyalty lay. Rock Lee was not easily impressed. He had trained too hard and too long. Scraped his way from being a joke to become an actual, serious ninja. All with the goal of proving you could become a great ninja with just taijutsu. He still had two obstacles left, of course, his own teammate and the blonde he would be fighting soon enough. But still, watching the closing exchanges of the match between Sakura and Tenten, he had to admit the pink-haired girl had some very beautiful movements. Plus, her skill with genjutsu was almost flawless. This had not been an easy match despite what Neji had said at the beginning. Still, Tenten was no pushover, and she did have a bit of a problem with Sakura, though Lee was unclear what exactly that was, just that it had something to do with Ino. Thinking about the girl, Lee glanced at an impassive-looking Sasuke and then looked at the blonde who had been glaring at Sakura throughout the whole match. Emotions would be running high, and Naruto was not likely to go down easily. Turning back, Lee saw Tenten force her way through a genjutsu and, with expert use of her last remaining weapons, Senbon needles, secure a victory. Yosh! Ten. A truly bright and beautiful flame of feminine youth, Lee shouted, swept up in his emotions of her victory, just barely realizing that the orange-clad boy beside him was also cheering Tenten. Winner, Tenten. Lee grinned and glanced at Neji, who merely arched an eyebrow in silent curiosity. Lee knew that look. It was the look Neji usually wore whenever Tenten did something impressive. To date, it was the only sign that Neji cared about what she did or accomplished. The fifth match, Uzumaki Naruto vs Rock Lee. The referee shouted tiredly, "Come on down, already, and let's go." "Yosh, wish me luck," Lee said, flashing a smile at Neji as he hopped over the railing. A second later, he was joined by Naruto, who was sporting a gaze that was not easy to meet. "I understand your passion," Lee said firmly, not looking away from those eyes as he assumed a nice guy pose like his mentor Guy-sensei would. "Naruto-kun, I understand so much that it hurts. I promise that if you should lose this match, that I will defeat Uchiha Sasuke for you and Ino-chan." Whatever you say, fuzzy eyebrows, Naruto said, but Lee noted that it sounded less like an insult and more like a friendly nickname. Aha! So, he was right, and this Naruto was a fellow bright flame of youth. Shifting his body slightly, he lifted his hand palm up, settling into his taijutsu stance. Now, fifth match, begin. Lee waited for a split second, to see if the blonde would reveal his specialty, then took Guy-sensei's advice and assumed the initiative. With a surge of muscle, Lee covered the distance between them with blinding speed and, pushing off at the last minute to double his power, launched himself into a spinning jump round kick. Konoha Senpu. A second later, he was sent crashing to the ground from a punch to the face. Recovering with an expert flip, he landed in a crouch and took a moment to study the boy across from him. He wasn't sure how that had happened. One moment the blonde had been a sitting duck, and the next Naruto had been inside his defenses. Lee knew there was no way he could lose track of someone during a taijutsu exchange, but he just had. Disturbed but not undaunted, the green-clad ninja darted forward once more with even greater speed, zigzagging to confuse the blonde. It was doing amazingly well, since Naruto was looking around utterly confused. Lee grinned to himself and allowed the blonde to catch a glimpse of him on the right and then darted with blinding speed to the left to catch the boy by surprise. Naruto turned at the last moment, but Lee knew it was too late. His fist was about to S into the blonde ninja. And then Lee was caught by surprise as Naruto once more appeared inside his guard with a punch S into his mouth. Going with the momentum, Lee flipped, attempting to catch the blonde with twin front kicks but instead hit only air. Landing upright, Lee stared at the boy in utter confusion. This was impossible. Nobody other than Gai-sensei or Neji should have been able to stand a chance against him in taijutsu. And yet, this Uzumaki Naruto was doing just that, and he appeared even to be beating him at it. "You really are strong," Lee said after a moment. "Hee, thanks," the blonde said with a smile. Lee returned the smile and then, turning serious, launched into even greater feats of speed. Yet, no matter how fast he moved, the other genin always managed to slip inside his guard and counterattack. It was like trying to hit the wind, or playing a game of tag. Still, Lee didn't give up, and, finally, after what felt like hours, he managed to nail the blonde with a punch that actually managed to knock the boy off his feet. Skidding to a halt, Lee grinned at his dazed-looking opponent. "Yosh, you're it." Naruto shook his head as if to clear it and then slowly climbed back to his feet, smirking despite his busted lip. "You wanna play tag?" Lee wondered for a moment about the chill that suddenly raced up his spine and then he watched, in utter fascination as the blonde literally disappeared in a burst of speed. One moment he had been there, and the next he wasn't. It was like seeing Gai-sensei move. Lee was so taken aback by this that he barely managed to register the blonde reappearing in a rising crouch before him, a fist aimed at his midsection. Lee reacted by tensing his stomach muscles a half-second before impact, lessening the chance of having the air knocked out of him. It still hurt, but he managed to react, grabbed the arm, and, twisting his hips, threw the boy. Naruto flipped through the air, landed in a crouch and suddenly disappeared yet again. This time, however, Lee was less stunned and waited for the attack he knew was coming, despite being unable to see his opponent. Sensing the attack coming from behind, Lee turned, managing to avoid the punch by a hair's breadth and then countered with a vertical punch to the boy's ribs. Naruto went crashing backwards into the ground, and Lee paused, frowning in confusion. His experience was telling him something was off in this fight. The boy covered ground with alarming speed, but when it came to his taijutsu speed, he was several steps below Lee. But he remembered the earlier exchange and wondered if maybe the boy specialized in counter-attacking. Deciding to find out for sure, Lee darted forward just as the boy had managed to regain his feet. Lashing out with a vicious right hook, Lee realized how bad an idea this was. A split second later Naruto, the formerly sitting duck, was inside Lee's guard SA palm heel into his chin, followed by a spinning side kick to the solar plexus. Jackknifing backwards, Lee winced through the pain and managed to cushion his landing before rolling back to his feet. He noted the blonde already missing and managed to avoid the incoming attack, then countered. Naruto moved again with that unusual speed of his and Lee avoided, countered, and gained the initiative. Right until Naruto slipped through his defenses yet again. Minutes stretched out endlessly as they exchanged blows, and Lee was finally beginning to understand his opponent. Naruto was able to cover ground much faster than Lee could at the moment, but his attacks were standard fare for ninja. It was only in counter-attacking that Naruto became nigh unbeatable. Lee didn't understand how that worked, but he accepted that, as long as he didn't attack Naruto directly, he could maintain control of the match. Not that he was ahead by that much. In all honesty, this fight was very even, and Lee seriously considered dropping his weights. However, if Naruto was a taijutsu specialist, not something Lee bought completely, he would be wearing weights as well. So it only stood to reason that if Lee dropped his weights, then Naruto, if he was using them, would drop his, and they'd be right back where they started. Breaking apart after a particularly brutal exchange, Lee used his tongue to check a tooth. Wincing slightly, he saw the blonde panting and clutching his shoulder tightly. Lee felt some satisfaction at that sight. No matter how even they were, Lee could feel that he was dealing much more damage than Naruto was. Then, the blonde grinned rather dangerously and formed an unusual seal. Cage Bunshin. Lee blinked in surprise, realizing that the boy could use ninjutsu. Then his eyes widened in shock as he suddenly found himself surrounded by what appeared to be 20 or 30 Narutos. Somehow he didn't think they were merely illusions. And suddenly, this fight didn't seem so even anymore. Geez, why doesn't he drop his weights? Tenten muttered, leaning against the railing, watching the shockingly even fight below. She had never expected to see another boy as fast, or even faster, than Lee. Because he does not wish for Uzumaki-san to do the same, Neji explained blandly from beside her, his arms crossed and eyes flickering across the battlefield. Which is foolish, since Naruto can go no faster. Huh, but if he's that fast, he has to be using weights. No, Neji said with a shake of his head, as Cage Bunshin suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Uzumaki-san is using Shunshin no Jutsu to simulate speed. If Lee would drop the weights, he would gain an advantage. Then we should tell Lee. Tenten said excitedly. He'll have this match in the bag, then. I said he would have an advantage, Neji explained calmly. He would not win, however. The more I watch, the more it becomes obvious. Uzumaki-san is not a taijutsu specialist. What he does specialize in, however, I cannot say. Well, then Lee can. Lee would have the advantage in the hand-to-hand, Neji said, see her off. However, Uzumaki-san would fall back onto his own specialty, and, since we do not know what that is exactly, we don't know if the balance would remain in Lee's favor. He's our teammate. Yes, but this is his fight. Don't worry, he'll notice soon enough, Neji supplied in mild interest. Have you noticed anything strange about the Cage Bunshin? No, Tenten muttered in annoyance, wanting to shout for Lee to lose the weights and not have to wait for the boy to figure it out. Lee is amazingly fast, yet the numbers are still too low for even Lee to have defeated so many in such a short amount of time. A trap, Tenten said in surprise and worry, counting the number of Cage Bunshin present. No, a strategy, Neji explained slowly, activating his Byakugan and weighing his words carefully. A basic strategy, rudimentary at best, but effective. What is it? You'll see soon enough. Lee was on autopilot. There was no time to think about the next move or about how quickly the crowd of Cage Bunshin were dwindling. All there was time for was swift, decisive action. Destroy one Cage Bunshin and move on to the next, repeatedly, until either they were gone or he was too exhausted. Clearing the field of at least 7 more Cage Bunshins, Lee paused, his sea heaving as he surveyed his remaining obstacles. They were formidable, but he could see the numbers were far too thin to be a threat for much longer. Shaking such thoughts off, the taijutsu specialist focused on the 2 charging Cage Bunshin and rose onto the balls of his feet before exploding into battle. The first one that reached him suffered a sidekick to the stomach and then, as that one doubled over, Lee grasped the back of his head and yanked it harshly against his knee. The Cage Bunshin promptly disappeared in a puff of smoke, and Lee pivoted, leaping into the air, spinning as his leg shot out and nearly separated the second Cage Bunshin's head from his shoulders. Lee landed lightly and watched with a smirk as the copy disappeared, then leaped back and twisted so that he could produce a kunai to parry a blow aimed at him from yet another Cage Bunshin. Twisting to deflect another blow, the boy lashed out with a kick to destroy another Cage Bunshin. Soon, it all became a blur once more, deflecting the kunai from the one Cage Bunshin while dealing death to the others that were charging him. Still, no matter how it appeared, Lee knew that he and Naruto were still even, these Cage Bunshin were just to wear him down, and he had to admit they were doing a good job. As the blades clashed together, Lee managed a deft flick and twisted the kunai to one side, striking the Cage Bunshin in the sea. Gra! The Cage Bunshin managed before exploding. Lee, however, was wide open as another Cage Bunshin lunged in, and Lee swung his arm out wildly in surprise. The Bunshin neatly avoided the blow, disappearing in that odd way of his, and then a rapid combo into Lee's body. Punch, kick, elbow, palm heel. Lee lost track, each blow heavier than the last. Then, suddenly, he was swept off his feet, and he had a moment to register what was happening before the Cage Bunshin pounced on him. Lee reacted a split second faster than the clone, jamming his knees under its body and pushing it off him with a heave. The cage bunchen twisted in the air, landed on its feet like a cat, and immediately sprang at Lee, who was on his feet once more, a second time. This time, Lee was ready, and he spun out of the way and lashed out a kunai, plunging it between the clone's shoulders. Amid the puff of smoke, Lee sensed another attack, and he threw himself into a forward roll, dodging the hail of shuriken, and regained his feet at the startled cage bunchen's feet. With startling speed, Lee planted a roundhouse kick to the cage bunchen's face with his right foot, then reversed in the same motion to a heel kick to his opponent's temple. The cracks from the impacts echoed in the still air. The cage bunchen cried out, staggering away to disappear in the telltale puff of smoke, and Lee sensed yet another attack from the side. Turning, Lee ducked the incoming round kick and delivered several powerful punches to the ribs, force the cage bunchen to disappear. A second later, Lee blocked a round kick to the stomach, which left his head wide open. A second after that, he was sent crashing face first to the ground from another round kick to the side of his head. Recovering quickly, Lee regained his feet, turning to stare at Naruto. Naruto grinned and then darted forward. Lee whirled around and delivered a spinning back kick to Naruto's stomach. Naruto, unprepared for the assault and in no way ready to deal with it, doubled over from lack of air. Lee returned to his defensive stance for only a fraction of a second before firing off a jump front kick to the boy's face. Naruto, already staggering from the first blow, went flying. Lee landed before Naruto did, and he watched in satisfaction as Naruto collapsed on the ground. His joy was short-lived, however, when 10 cage bunchens appeared out of thin air. Lee dodged to the left, striking out at the same time with his right hand, driving the punch into the airborne ninja's solar plexus. Before the cage bunchen had completely disappeared in a puff of smoke, Lee was already moving, spinning into a butterfly round kick to another cage bunchen's head. Landing, he allowed his momentum to carry him around and a spinning heel kick into the jaws of yet another 2 cage bunchen. Coming to a stop, he paused, eyes darting left, then right, 4 down, 6 left. Sensing an attack from behind, he shifted his body weight and dodged the punch aimed at his head, then drove his left elbow into the cage bunchen's face. Pivoting at the flash of incoming orange on his right, he fired off a front kick round kick combination that destroyed yet another cage bunchen. 3 left. Ducking a round kick from the left, Lee spun into a leg sweep, taking the attacking clone off his feet, before rising with his momentum to drive a left spinning heel kick into the airborne cage bunchen. Coming to a stop, he dropped his leg and pivoted, hammering home, without looking, a right side kick into the face of the second to last cage bunchen lunging at him. 1 left. Dropping to the ground, Lee avoided the last cage bunchen, then planting his hand on the ground, threw a side kick to the clone's chin, lifting it into the air. Heaving, he spun several spinning kicks into the clone before it disappeared in a puff of smoke. Flipping as gravity reasserted itself, Lee landed in a crouch, fingers braced against the ground as he glanced at the battered-looking, but now standing, Naruto. Yosh, you were truly a worthy opponent, filled with the bright flame of youth, Lee said, giving him a thumbs up in true appreciation, before sliding into his fighting stance. However, I have won this match. Oi. It ain't over till it's over, fuzzy eyebrows. Naruto shouted back, slipping into his own fighting stance. Lee paused, then allowed himself to grin in appreciation. He could accept the boy's willingness not to give up. He had fought so hard and so desperately to reach this point. To surrender was not an option. Shifting his weight ever so slightly, Lee shot forward with all of his speed, ready to deliver the final blow and, thus, claim his victory. It happened between heartbeats, the half-second that decides battles. Naruto suddenly darted aside with that full speed, pulling a string taut. The chain reaction was instantaneous, the half-dozen explosive notes that had been covered with dirt suddenly tearing a chunk out of the battlefield. Lee, at the last second, managed to push off and into the air to avoid being obliterated. He was carried higher than expected by the concussive force, but all that mattered in Lee's mind was that Naruto had mistimed. It had been frighteningly close. Lee knew, if he had been a half a second slower, or if Naruto had timed it better, that he would have been ill apart by that explosion. Twisting in the air, he spotted his opponent, who was staring at him intently while he descended. Lee braced himself as best he could, ready to launch into his attack as soon as he landed and then realized he couldn't move his body at all. Darting his eyes away from the blonde and to the rushing ground, he clenched his eyes, preparing for the bone-crushing landing. Instead, he felt a pair of arms grasp him, and his momentum shifted, prompting him to open his eyes and find that a cage bunchen had snatched him from midair. A minute later, he was deposited on the ground by a disappearing cage bunchen, but he still couldn't move a muscle. Helpless, he stared up at the sky, amazed to find his blonde opponent hovering over him with a kunai. Tag, Naruto said, tapping the blade against his forehead. You're it. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. The referee announced, his voice stunned, while the crowd was cheering loudly. Lee tried to ask how, tried to convey the impossibility of the situation, but he couldn't move his mouth. Naruto, grinning, crouched down, speaking in a secretive manner. It's the Kanashibari no Jutsu. It'll wear off in a few more seconds. I thought I'd never hit you with it. Lee blinked, then felt his body relax and was helped to his feet by his new friend. Yosh. Impressive. Thanks, Naruto said, leading the way off the field. Next time, though, let's have a real match where we don't have to hold back. Of course. And we shall see who burns brightest with the bright flame of youthful power. Oi. Has anyone ever told you you're weird? Naruto asked thoughtfully, as they entered the stairwell to the fighter's balcony. Cool, but really weird. Aha, Lee said, allowing himself to smile. Yosh, this is coming from the boy wearing orange. Why does everyone have to disrespect the orange? The Hokage stifled his groan of discomfort, his back was sore, and his end stiff. He had been sitting in one spot on a stone chair for far too long. He could not, however, just get up and leave. He had to present a strong face to the others, especially after the Uchiha's little rant from earlier. He was definitely going to have a few words with Fugaku about his son. He would stress how important it was that Sasuke did not offend future dignitaries or the villages that provided ninja with both customers and places to eat and live. He would have to explain exactly how and why Sasuke would have to publicly apologize and admit that he was wrong. Or the Sandaime could just wait for Naruto to get a hold of the Uchiha genius. The Sandaime had to bite back his laugh at the thought. After the match between Lee and Naruto, he wouldn't put much value on the Uchiha's ability to pass in one piece. Hell, even without that match, the Sandaime was going to make sure he didn't pass anyway. The boy needed a lesson in humility, that was obvious. Who do you think will win? The Kazekage said in a soft whisper, so that only they could hear. The Sandaime said, shifting his attention to the latest match raging. Aberrane Shino versus Temari. It was so far even, at least in his opinion. I think it's too early to tell, Kazekage Dono. Your daughter is very talented, and her intelligence is keen. However, Aberrane-san is quite skilled himself, and also quite intelligent. Yes, the Kazekage said softly, nodding slightly. However, I was referring to the match between the Uchiha and the Uzumaki child. It will favor Naruto-kun, the Sandaime said after a moment. He did not display his full abilities, after all, knowing that his main opponent could copy them. True, Kazekage said. However, he will be facing a Uchiha. Sandaime said. Do not count Naruto-kun out just yet. He is quite resilient. I'm sure it will be a good match. I hope so. I am very interested in seeing Gaara face someone of either boy's level. I, as well, would like to see that. Yamanaka Ino was having an argument with reality. She was, naturally, losing, but it wasn't like she could just give up. After all, with her arm in a cast, she was almost promised a long period of inactivity. Ambidextrous or not, having only one arm was a liability. Cursing her fate and luck, she flopped back onto her cot and glared up at the ceiling. If she concentrated hard enough, she could hear the noise of the exams, which was what had woken her up in the first place. There had been an extremely loud explosion, and it hadn't been until she heard Naruto announced as the winner that she had understood where it had come from. Sighing, she listened absently to the distant noises of a battle, between Shino and some other genin. He should win, Ino mused silently in annoyance. She would have gone to cheer him on, but her mother was set against letting her out of the bed. Eyeing the door to her room and the still-closed bathroom door, the blonde girl weighed her chances of escaping before her mother reappeared. Not good, since, a moment later, her mother stepped out of the bathroom and walked back over to the chair next to her bed. Sighing, Ino closed her eyes. I know you're upset, dear, her mother said softly. It's just that you shouldn't be out of bed just yet, you've just woken up. But, the medic said I could go watch the other matches, Ino said, opening her eyes to glare at her mom. Yes, but I think you should rest, her mother said with a sweet smile. I'm a mother, and I'm ended to worry over my baby. I'm not a baby, Ino pouted before giving up. She had yet to win against her mom. Oh, I was thinking, and I know you don't like it, her mom said after a moment. But, maybe you should work at the flower shop. We'll pay you. You could use the money to buy a new sword. Ino winced at the memory of her last sword snapping under the heel of her former crush. It was hard, Ino mused silently, to continue liking someone when they humiliated you, insulted your family and then shattered something that was part of you. Didn't mean she wasn't hurt or that she didn't want to just curl up and cry, but she wasn't about to give that prick the satisfaction. Sighing, Ino sat up and cradled her arm to her stomach, looking out the window near her bed, staring up at the slightly cloudy sky. Oh, you know that Naruto you were telling us about. He came in to check on you a while ago. Ino blinked, startled out of her thoughts, turning back to her mom. He did. Yeah, promised to beat that Sasuke for you. Ino scowled, then quietly got out of bed, slipping her shoes on. Honey, what do you think you're doing? Turning, Ino arched an eyebrow at her mom. I'm going to watch Naruto-kun kick that Uchiha's A. Then, leaving her mom sitting there, she marched across the room and out the door. Naruto was going to be fighting for her, had promised to win, and she would be there to see it. To cheer him on, just like he had for her. Yamanaka Ino was nothing if not loyal. Yamanaka Inoki downed his latest shot of sake, eyes flickering to the television to check on the status of the last match. If he was not mistaken, it looked as if that girl with the fan would manage a win. He just hoped it would be soon. The only match he cared about was the one between Sasuke and Naruto, and the sooner the second round started, the sooner he would know how much longer he had to wait. He wasn't alone, there were several others in the bar who were eager to see the match. After all, Sasuke had alienated a large portion of the village, and Naruto appeared to be the only one around to challenge him. The Uchiha present naturally scoffed at this, but said little else. It's finally over, someone said. That Temari girl won, which means, Boruto, I get 100 yo. Inoki looked up, his fresh cup of sake halfway to his mouth. He watched in silence as they announced Temari as the winner and then, without realizing it, watched as the names for the second round matches faded into being. He heard the mutters when the first match was revealed, his hand trembled, and he gulped the sake down and then began to drink straight from the bottle. Finished, he stood and, tossing money on the counter, started for the door. Inoki-san, where are you going? Boruto asked, surprise in his tone. Inoki paused, and turned back to the man, eyes hard. Naruto and that Uchiha are going to fight in the first round, and you think I'm going to sit here and watch it? Oh hell no, I'm going to watch that gay little pretty boy of a Uchiha get his ass stomped. That said, he turned and hurried out of the bar, ignoring the glares the Uchiha present shot after him and at those who cheered in agreement. Second round, first match, the referee shouted, sounding slightly anxious. Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto. Sasuke kept his face emotionless, while on the inside he was smiling in satisfaction. Finally, he could face this loser and prove himself superior. Could finally quiet the sense of ill ease in his soul, knowing that the blonde had been the last genin ever to strike him. Sasuke-kun, good luck, Sakura offered cheerfully. The raven-haired boy offered, which was as close to thanks as he got. Then, following his opponent's lead, he preformed a shunshin into the arena. Landing adroitly, he flicked his eyes over the serious-looking idiot he would be fighting, noting the signs of mild fatigue. Naruto, however, was glaring at him, with an alarming amount of hostility. You got something to say, loser? Sasuke said after another moment of silent consideration. Yeah, Naruto said, his eyes narrowing. A clan doesn't make you special. Your B doesn't make you any better than anyone else. You keep on telling yourself that. I promise you, Naruto said dangerously. I'm going to prove it, just like I'm going to be Hokage. I'm going to prove to everyone that just being an Uchiha means jackass. Sasuke stiffened, then growled, his eyes unconsciously swirling into the feared Sharingan. I'm going to show you the true power of the Sharingan. Oi. I just realized something, Naruto said in mock surprise. Your name has Uki in it. You're a Uki. Wah, Sasuke said, startled. Shut up. I am not an Uki. Sasuke the Uki, Naruto shouted, grinning maliciously. Sasuke lunged forward, covering the distance between them as fast as he could. He saw the surprise on Naruto's face, then grinned, lashing out with a vicious jab at the blonde's nose. The Sharingan recorded every detail of this moment, right up until the blonde somehow dropped from his line of sight. Sasuke felt a jolt of surprise and deja vu ran through him, then he felt a palm heel strike crashing into his chin. Pain flared through the Uchiha's mind, and he was actually lifted off the ground from the unexpected blow, followed by what felt like a foot crashing into his stomach. The end result was for Sasuke to gasp for air while he sailed through air before crashing painfully into the ground. Rolling from the momentum, he came to a stop and remained perfectly still until he could breathe again. Climbing slowly to his feet, he glared at the blonde, who was looking at him with enough malice to make the Uchiha think twice. Whoa! Hit him with a 20-hit combo next time, Naruto-kun. Someone shouted, joined by another loud cheer for the blonde to unleash his true youthful power. However, that brief encounter did tell Sasuke one important thing: Naruto had the advantage in close combat. Whatever style he used, it made his Sharingan's reading ability worthless for taijutsu. Which meant Sasuke would just have to keep this at long range and win through his use of ninjutsu. Sasuke was pulled out of his thoughts as he caught Naruto starting a shunshin, amazingly enough without even an element to help cover his movements. Sharingan swirling to keep up with the high-speed movements, Sasuke watched the boy close the distance and then formed the seal for the kaiten, Gukaku, drawing chakra from his mouth into his sea before exhaling a stream of fire that erupted into a large sphere of flames. Sasuke caught movement out of the edge of his eyes and see the jutsu short, twisting to find the boy appearing from a hasty kawarimi with a rock. The blonde darted forward once more, trying the shunshin yet again, and Sasuke smirked, forming another seal for the kaiten, Hausenka. A moment later, the air between Sasuke and Naruto was filled with several dozen small fireballs. Sasuke twisted, letting the attack fail, and lashed out with a fist just as Naruto, who had used a shunshin in mid-shunshin, something only Shisui had ever managed, to Sasuke's knowledge, appeared within arm's reach. The blonde was wide open, and the fist connected with a satisfying crunch, snapping the boy's head back. Sasuke followed this attack with several even more rapid blows before finishing with jump reverse side kick, which sent Naruto tumbling end over end backwards before landing in a small heap. Hey, pathetic, Sasuke said, watching as the other boy stirred and slowly regained his feet. Didn't you know that my Sharingan can see you when you're doing the shunshin? Your biggest trump cards are nothing before it. I can find the real you out 100 kage bunshin, and I can see through your Maisai Gakka. Naruto swiped the back of his hand against his mouth and grinned, teeth B. Really? Well, can you see this? Sasuke started to respond when the blonde suddenly disappeared again, but this time he was accompanied by an extreme gust of wind, forcing Sasuke to cover his eyes. Realizing the trick, the genius opened them once more, his eyes spotting the blonde already in position and unleashing a jutsu. Futen, Daitopper. Sasuke felt his eyes widen a second before the gale force winds S into him and sent him hurtling through the air, before crashing into the wall in a cloud of smoke. He struggled to move against the blast of wind, but found himself effectively pinned in place until the jutsu S and he was allowed to topple forward. Groaning, Sasuke slowly staggered to his feet, his joints sore and tasting something coppery in his mouth. Spitting, he swore, seeing B splatter the ground. Looking up, he found the field empty, then feeling an attack from behind, turned just in time to find the blonde crouched behind him, his fingers in the tiger seal. Hidden Leaf Ancient Taijutsu Supreme Attack, 1,000 Years of Pain. A grinning Naruto shouted a second before jabbing his fingers forward. Gah! Sasuke shouted as he was launched into the air, clutching at his A. Landing with a thump in a cloud of dust, Sasuke felt his cheeks burning in shame, made worse by the fact that so many people were laughing at him. Climbing to his feet angrily, he spun, sending Naruto a glare that was just short of actually K. Naruto's grin disappeared as he met that glare with just as much feeling. It was time to show why the Uchiha were considered the strongest. It was time to use a jutsu that he had seen Itachi practicing lately. Clutching his wrist, He began to concentrate, his hand stinging and then burning, but he could feel the chakra rushing to his hand. Soon enough, he'd have the Chidori, and this match would be over. Before he could move, the ground began to shake and tremble, causing Sasuke to stumble and break his concentration. The Chidori forgotten, for a moment Sasuke thought that whatever was happening was because of some jutsu that Naruto was doing, but when he looked up at the blonde, he was also looking around in confusion. What's happening? Naruto asked as everyone seemed to hold their breath. An explosion, Sasuke murmured in surprise. A deep, but hollow, rumble swept its way into the hall and suddenly people were shouting amid more explosions. Sasuke ignored that and instead focused his eyes on the billowing columns of smoke that were rising into the sky, where what appeared to be Anbu were fighting among themselves. Then he was pulled back to the arena as he heard Naruto shout something, and he found that the entire area was swept into a wave of violence as ninja fought ninja. Over it all, aware that Naruto was using Shunshin to rush headlong into the Compeer's balcony, Sasuke heard two words. Unity. Gaara. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.